Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. In this one, I'm taking a look at Sentry, the first native tier 3 character to not only get a uniform, but also reach tier 4. There's a lot of stuff to showcase, so I'm probably just going to jump straight into it. The initial testing that I did was with just an extreme obelisk that had guard break immunity and I think 3 seconds of invincible on it, so it was basically just a horrible custom gear for the character to showcase just how good he is even with a horrible custom gear option. And then a little bit later, or maybe after 2 or 3 tests of that in Timeline, I ended up switching to a Brilliant Conquest and tested that to show you how much of a difference that makes. All the testing in PvE is also done without a damage proc, just to show you his baseline performance. Although everyone thought that Sentry would be outright broken in PvP, having all those high base stats and getting boosted even further with the uniform upgrade as well as the tier 4, it's not really the case that he is completely broken. He is definitely very strong, but I wouldn't say that he's outright broken. The devs were a little bit reserved, and that's actually a good thing because it did end up balancing the character to an extent. He has some flaws that you can exploit to basically counter him in PvP, and I'll talk about what those are when I cover him in Timeline, as well as things like Alliance Conquest. Even though I don't really plan on using Sentry in PvE, I did do his baseline PvE performance test, which is basically to take him into the first stage that his restriction is met versus null, and without using a leadership or support. With that, I was able to complete stage 24 with about 2 minutes and 20 seconds remaining. That clear time is easily above average, as most characters will likely be able to complete that same stage with almost 2 minutes remaining or a little bit less than that. I also went to stage 69, this time adding a leadership and support to see how much of his performance improved and whether he could actually complete this stage. And he was able to complete the first phase within that 2-minute window, which means that he could potentially be able to clear the stage just at level 70. So again, that shows you how good the character is in PvE, not just outright amazing, but definitely above average. The level 80 upgrade for the character is a massive improvement, and you can easily see that in this clip. Before, at level 70, I was only able to complete the first phase within that 2-minute window, and then with the level 80 upgrade, I was basically able to complete the entire fight in that same amount of time. If you plan on using the character specifically for PvE or are interested in making him somewhat of a hybrid, you can definitely use him with a single skill damage proc like an energy or destruction. He is proc friendly. However, if you also want to get that added advantage of using him in things like Alliance Battle Extreme or Alliance Battle Legend, even though he isn't meta for those particular days that he qualifies for, you'd probably have to use a CTP of Rage. I wouldn't really advocate building him for PvE, considering just how useful he is for PvP. However, if you do want to build him for that, those are options you can explore. And you also have the added advantage of the character having super guard break immunity built in, as you'll see in the Timeline tests, so you don't necessarily have the punishment or kind of negative aspect of not having guard break immunity in your kit, because he kind of already has it built in. Again, you can see that even without a damage proc, the character does pretty well in PvE, specifically World Boss Legend stages that he qualifies for, because he has that leadership tag, and you can leverage the use of awesome support characters like White Fox. To upgrade the character's potential from level 70 to level 80, you're going to have to use tier 4 materials this time around as opposed to tier 3 materials. Most likely, you're going to end up using Life Seed, since you'll have more of that material compared to Carbonadium and Soul of the Faltine. To get to level 72, it's 111 Soul of the Faltine, or 127 Carbonadium, or 95 Life Seed if you use the 100% method. To level 74, it's 221 Faltine, or 253 Carbonadium, or 189 Life Seed. To level 76, it's 341 Faltine, 379 Carbonadium, or 282 Life Seed. To level 78, it's 681 Faltine, 758 Carbonadium, or 565 Life Seed. And then finally to level 80, it's 918 Faltine, 1011 Carbonadium, or 752 Life Seed. Similar to other characters, you use bios to actually upgrade the level, but unlike them, you also have the option of using CCF instead of it. I'm not sure if the current CCF cost is bugged. It seems to be drastically lower as a ratio compared to the number of bios. It only really takes you about 500 CCF to go from level 70 to 80, as opposed to 7,500 bios to do the same. So if you have the CCF, which you should if you've been playing World Boss Lost Legend, I would highly advocate using that method instead of the BIOS. Like I mentioned previously, the devs seem to be a little bit reserved with Sentry's upgrades. As you can see from the stat bumps for a character that is a native tier 3 one, his stat bumps should have been insane, but they aren't really that drastic as you would expect. His energy attack doesn't even increase by 10,000, it's closer to 8,000, and the only other stat that has a massive upgrade besides the instinct is the HP, which increases by around 20,000. Regardless, even though the increases aren't that great, the base stats are actually quite high and above most other characters, so I'm guessing that's why they were a little bit reserved to give him a lot more from this, especially considering with the addition of the uniform at the same time, that increases those values a little bit more. If you want to get an idea of the costs to upgrade the character from level 70 to level 80 and tier 4, here are what my materials and gold looked like before, and this is what they looked like after. Using the 10% method and exclusively Life Seed to upgrade his potential, as well as CCF to actually upgrade his level, it cost me about 100 million gold, 5,200 Life Seed, 9,700 Carbonadium, and 7,800 Soul of the Faltine, taking him from level 70 to level 80 and then tier 4. As a general tip, if you have a lot of Life Seed in your inventory, I would highly recommend not using the 10% method and just going with the 100% method so that you end up generally using less gold, because the gold costs from level 70 to 80 are actually quite high, especially if you get very unlucky and end up failing a lot. It might cost you way more gold than if you just use the 100% method and just sacrifice the Life Seed instead. Once I ended up maxing out the build with Odin's Brilliant Conquest, maxed out Artifact, and so on, I was able to crack into the top 5 and got the character to rank 4 overall. In terms of the strikers for PvE, you probably want to go with either Thor or Ghost Rider. If you have Ghost Rider with a PvE build, then that would probably be the better option, since it also maxes out his tier 4 level. And in similar fashion to Jean Grey, the tier 4 skill actually accumulates very quickly, so that's one of the reasons why you want your top striker in there, because you can pretty much spam the striker from the tier 4 skill almost every rotation. In PvP, you can also use Ghost Rider as a striker, and some of the other ones to consider are Spider-Man and Hulk, since they are both good strikers, do a high amount of damage, and also max out his tier 4 skill. Just keep in mind that if you're using the new uniform for Hulk, he does end up losing that iframe ignore on the striker skill, but does end up doing more burst damage, so you kind of have to consider the trade-off and see which one works best for you. From level 80 to tier 4, Sentry is able to clear this stage 10 seconds quicker, but that obviously is not the level of improvement that the tier 4 provides. It's just that he completed the stage so quickly at level 80 that you can't really see the level of improvement because there isn't really any room to show the improvement. You can kind of get a better idea versus Mephisto. Here the clear time improved by roughly around 1 minute from level 80 to tier 4. And then you can see the same level of improvement versus King, where the clear time also improved by roughly around 1 minute. Although the character does have all of the cancel effects for ABX, and I believe is only missing Shock for ABL, he likely won't be used here either because there are better options for the specific days, the Universal Hero days. You have Ghost Rider as well as other characters, and in ABL you have the same. However, the character does decently, and I was able to score around 10 million at level 80 without a damage proc, so he can be pretty good if you do end up putting a damage proc on him like a Rage, but again there are other better options and he won't really be meta for any specific days in ABX or ABL. Again, it is worth noting that he does get a significant bump once you get him to tier 4. I was able to improve my score by around 2 million, and the main reason for that is, again, because you can fill up that tier 4 meter so quickly that you can just keep spamming that striker and get a massive improvement that way. In ABL, I was able to score close to 5.5 million and could potentially have scored 6 million if I played it better, which again shows that the character is quite good regardless of the build that you have. So if you wanted to consider using him for ABL, you could, but again, you have more value by building the character for PvP. You can see from this clip that he is able to solo Giant Boss Raid, especially now that Dormammu's overall health has been decreased. I can't really tell you how well he does in here because I kind of have to get a baseline after a couple of weeks to see how much of a difference the health bar decrease made. But regardless, you can see that he can solo this, and once you get him to tier 4, the clear time improves by roughly around 40 seconds or a little bit more. In terms of the rotation, I used a quick cancel of the first and second skill, then did a 4 delay cancel once he hits the ground, 5 cancel 3. Once you have the ultimate skill, you do the same thing, but you cancel the third skill into the ultimate skill. When you have your tier 4 skill, you basically use that whenever it's available, just to get that added extra striker damage layered on top, as well as because it fills up so quickly that you want to keep activating it every time that you have it. Undoubtedly, the character has the most value in PvP because he has many of the top mechanics or skills that lets him excel there. He has the much coveted revive passive. He also has the debuff leadership that applies to allies. He has a ton of survival, either through partial or full iframes pretty much on all skills except for the first skill. He also has super guard break on pretty much every skill again, but the fourth skill. He has invincible, healing on 2 skills, the second and the fifth skill, and just a whole bunch of other things, barrier, damage immunity, damage reduction, and so on. In these first 3 tests that I did with the character, they were just with him at level 70 and without really using any proper supports for him except for health increase. And on top of that, I'm also using an extreme obelisk with just guard break, immunity, and 3 seconds of invincible, so it's hardly anything really of value on the character, but regardless, he's still able to just go through all of these meta characters. Fortunately, because I was trying to get the tests in as early as possible, I also have the challenger buffs on me, and one of the effects for that is that he bypasses the immortal effect, which is why you're seeing Wolverine and Madeline dying pretty much in 1 life. I also did tests in the other half of the clips how he does without the challenger buffs, but regardless, you can see how he does versus revive characters and most of the metas in general. The top reasons why the character does so well is because his AI rotation is good. It focuses on the second skill first, which not only provides him with 80% penetration to all skills, but also is that iframe ignore, as well as super guard break, also gives him healing, and removes any of the debuffs that are currently on him. Just keep in mind though that when that skill is activated, it does also override his debuff removal leadership, which kind of sucks, but because he can keep spamming that second skill, it kind of makes up for it because overall he has a more average uptime with that debuff removal going on than it being off. The second skill is also on a very short cooldown and allows him to move around the map similar to Thanos' first skill, which is really good for avoiding damage, and it is also a full iframe, so that also gives him that added layer of protection if the opponent doesn't use an iframe ignore of themselves. By the way, for this clip and the next one and the previous 2 clips you saw that had the same team, I'm basically doing a direct comparison between an Extreme Obelisk and a Brilliant Conquest to show you just how much of an improvement that CTP makes for him, especially because it gives him immunity to reflect, which is very key for his kit, and I'll cover with the CTP options. So besides that second skill being so pivotal in his kit and having that low cooldown, providing him with a full iframe, having iframe ignore, providing 80% penetration to all sources, being able to move around to avoid damage, having that debuff removal, and also healing, and the AI then usually going into the fifth skill that is also an iframe, does a huge amount of AoE damage, and can still hurt the opponent even if he gets knocked out of the fifth skill. The AI will then go into the third skill, which gives him even more damage because it has damage accumulation. It also moves him around, has super guard break, and is also an iframe skill. And then from there it goes into the fourth skill. So basically his AI rotation is great. The second skill is very pivotal for him to be so strong, but on top of all that, like I mentioned briefly while talking about this, all of his skills pretty much have super guard break on them, so he will basically lock down the opponent while he's just bombarding them with damage. One thing worth noting is that if you have multiple characters with debuff leaderships on the team, like Silver Surfer, Sentry, and Thanos and things like that, you want to use Sentry as your main leadership because his attack increase that he provides to the team is independent of that debuff removal. So basically when he uses his second skill, he'll overwrite the debuff removal, but the attack increase is independent of that, so you'll always have it up. But for characters like Silver Surfer that have the attack and defense bundled in with the debuff removal, that will be overwritten and you'll lose those benefits. In terms of the build options, you can pretty much make anything work. You saw that I was using an Extreme Obelisk with horrible stats and he was still doing fine, but in my opinion, the most ideal options for him are firstly a CTP of Conquest, and then a CTP of Greed. I say a CTP of Conquest and Greed because they provide him with Reflect immunity on that top proc, which is the most ideal for his kit because he oftentimes will end up just downing himself because of the 5th skill just doing splash damage and being reflected back to him. A CTP of Conquest is the most ideal option first because his offense capabilities are already good, and that added survival allows him to go through more of his skills, building up his offense and survival even more by amplifying his healing and getting the damage accumulation from the 3rd skill, just rounding him out and just making him really difficult to deal with. I put a CTP of Greed second because that Reflect immunity is again really key for his kit, and because his offense is already good, but if you use a CTP of Greed, you can potentially take out the opponent quickly, and that in a way provides added survival to the character because you can't take damage if the opponent is dead. I would say though that the difference between a Conquest and a Greed is pretty significant, and I would advocate going for the Conquest first before the Greed if you feel that your offense stats are good. If you only have the character at level 70 or possibly 80 and feel that you need more offense to deal with the characters that you face in Timeline and things like Alliance Conquest, then by all means try the CTP of Greed as it might be a better option. It's sort of similar to the options that you would have for Jean Grey. You can build her tanky, but if that doesn't work too well for you, you could easily go with the CTP of Greed. Sentry also seems to have super guard break immunity built into his kit, similar to Gore, where he can't really be head rocked by any skills. You can see here, even though the super guard break immunity from the Brilliant Conquest isn't up, as you'll see in a second here, I can freely move around the 5th skill, and the only time that he gets locked down is when that debuff removal is down and he's getting CC'd but not actually head rocked. You can see I'm moving around freely in her 5th skill without being locked down. Because of this, you can also utilize something like a CTP of Refinement or a Regen and not have to worry about not having that super guard break immunity. You could also use potentially CTPs that don't even have guard break immunity on them, like a CTP of Rage for example. But just keep in mind that his most ideal performance seemed to be with the CTP of Conquest and the CTP of Greed, primarily because it gave you that immunity to Reflect, which is one of his weaknesses. I didn't really mention a Steel Authority. You definitely can utilize that to good effect as well, but in most cases the survivability effects that it provides are kind of overlapped by his kit, and in general the Conquest will provide you with more and better survivability options in comparison. Because Sentry can be difficult to deal with, here are some of the top easy ways I found to counter him. The first is to let Adam Warlock die off the first life, then on the second life immediately go into the 5th skill, delay cancel a bit when you see the orbs drop on the ground, then you go into your 2nd skill followed by your 3rd skill to get that damage accumulation, and then the 4th skill, and that should be able to take out his first life. From there you basically just let your character die and have Silver Surfer as the 2nd character to come in after Adam Warlock dies, and Sentry will end up nuking himself from the Reflect because in most cases the top proc won't be active even if they have a Conquest or a Greed. If you have your own Sentry and you're facing an opponent one, what you want to do is switch to your Sentry or just move away from him when he starts attacking. He'll go into his 5th skill and it has the kind of long animation. You basically just want to wait till you see the yellow spots turn kind of dark. Then you want to move in, use your 2nd skill followed by your 5th skill, quick canceling into them, and then your 4th skill. If you can't go into the 4th skill, then use the 2nd skill again, then the 4th skill, then finish off with the 3rd skill. This will most likely one-shot him, and even after he respawns, you can do the same thing. You can use the 2nd skill, move away, and then use the 5th skill followed by the 2nd skill right after to take out his 2nd life. You can also take out a life of Sentry with Jean Grey. You will more than likely die on your 1st life, but because Sentry will have used his 2nd skill, he will have overwritten his debuff Cleanse, which means that on the revive, you can spam your 5th and all your other skills, and he will be locked down, and you can basically nuke his life. An alternative to taking out Sentry's 2nd life, besides using the Reflect from Surfer, is to basically just swap into another character that can handle that after you take out his 1st life with Adam Warlock, like I mentioned previously. So you can see here I switched to Wolverine, moved away a little bit, and then just used the 5th skill to clean up. Similarly, you can do the same thing here, but instead of using Wolverine, I ended up using Hulk. You just move away after he uses the 2nd skill, and then wait a little bit for the 5th skill to decay, and then use your burst damage for Hulk, it's the 3 and 5. Also, I did mention that Sentry has that super guard break immunity built in, so he shouldn't be able to get head rocked, but for some reason Hulk is able to do that to him, so I don't know what's really going on here. Maybe the new Hulk uniform has some new kind of beyond super guard break that we don't know about, so I don't really know what's going on here, but for the most part, Sentry is immune to all kind of super guard break, except for, I guess, Titan Hulk. And the last character that I used to showcase to basically take out a second life is to use Thanos. Again, you move away after you use his second skill, he'll move towards you, you just move away from it, and then you just use your first skill, which should potentially one-shot Sentry, and even if it doesn't, if you've built your Thanos to be tanky, you can basically just keep spamming that first skill, and it should be able to take him out before he does the same to you. If you want to play Sentry on manual, you move around a little bit at first to avoid any kind of attacks from Silver Surfer. You can avoid the lockdown from his iframe ignore. Similarly, from an opponent Sentry, you can do the same. And you basically just want to go into your second skill to kind of knock them out of their skill and have your other effects active. You have your debuff removal, you have your penetration up, and then you want to go into your fifth skill, followed by your fourth skill right after, so you can stay in iframe and not get hit by reflect, and then immediately go into your third skill if that is also an option. You can see from my defense list and challenger timeline that the changes to PvP and Sentry in general have made it difficult for people to deal with, that constant lockdown and kind of burst damage that he provides. So the character is definitely good for timeline and is arguably now in the #1 spot just because of the utility that he provides with the lockdown, survivability, and everything else. You can get a clear idea of his strength in PvP as I was able to take him as a solo character with Level just to add in a support, get that skill damage bonus damage, as well as some health from Beast. I was able to take out Madeline and Wolverine's both of their lives, even though they had Colossus support. I was able to take down that whole team just with Sentry essentially, and even the team after, which was the Warriors of the Sky, regardless of the fact that they even did revive and did no damage to him because he just goes quickly into that iframe ignore right after. If you're still in denial on how strong tier 4 Sentry is in Alliance Conquest, here is another team I faced. One of the top meta teams of Silver Surfer, Carnage, and Agent Venom support, and he was able to take out this full team by himself, again using not even the most ideal supports, I would say. So the character can pretty much solo some of the top meta teams just by himself. And even though Surfer can potentially counter Sentry, if you have again that Conquest or Greed build, you are protected from Reflect and can pull off something like this. I found that the most reliable counter to Sentry is using Thanos, ideally with multiple supports. Sentry has a lot of difficulty taking out Thanos because usually for most characters he fights, he would rely on locking them down and chipping away at their health, but for Thanos, as he takes hits, he does end up healing, and then he immediately heals a lot by going into his first skill, and on top of that, Sentry relies on building up his buffs by going through multiple skills, but for Thanos, he removes all those buffs when he does the first skill. So essentially, as Thanos is able to hit Sentry, he'll basically be able to one or two shot him, whereas Sentry will just keep trying to attack him and for the most part won't really be able to get through unless maybe he has help from other metas or has additional supports maybe. Because of his PvP strength, Sentry is obviously a natural contender for Otherworld Battle when he isn't banned. You see here that if you use him in the starting position, he'll end up nuking the first two characters or their lives off the start. But one of the strategies that most people employ is to use him at the end, because at the start the same can be done to you and you basically end up losing Sentry. But if you put him at the end, you basically have the character go into his fifth skill, hitting multiple characters on the opponent team, and then even after he dies once, he'll go immediately into his quick second burst skill to whoever is left over on the opponent team. So for that reason, some people use him at the end of the team, and generally that seems to work better. That's pretty much the review of Sentry, and you can see that he is arguably in the top spot now for the majority of PvP. Timeline, Alliance Conquest, Otherworld Battle, possibly even Alliance Tournament. The top timeline teams are now probably going to be Sentry, Silver Surfer, and some combination of either Adam Warlock, Madeline, Wolverine, or Thanos in the third position. Really depends on who is banned, I guess, for a particular week. And in Challenger, it's mostly just going to be either Adam Warlock or possibly Thanos, most likely Thanos in that third position, because immortal effects don't really work there. Characters like Jean have fallen off the meta in Timeline because she dies so easily to reflect and does end up needing multiple skills active at the same time to take out an opponent, whereas more of these other characters now can do it with one skill. Other characters like Gore just don't have enough base stats to deal with tier 4s, and characters like Hulk can also be countered by reflect, but do end up having some value for burst damage if you are able to keep him alive long enough. The same thing can also be said for characters like Spider-Man, Carnage, and Ghost Rider. They can be good for taking out one life of the opponent, but can struggle to stay alive in the current meta, where characters can burst so quickly with just one skill. Sentry is by no means inexpensive. You do have to pay all those crystals to get the uniform. You need all the materials to upgrade him and even get him to tier 4. But if you do have that and the gold, I would recommend start working on him now. Try to get him to at least past level 70 so you don't have that penalty, ideally level 80. If you don't have the materials to get him to tier 4, don't necessarily worry about that now, just kind of see where it goes. But do keep in mind that Null was also teased kind of in that sheet or list of characters that would be getting an upgrade, so he could potentially be very good too if he gets to tier 4. You'll just have to wait and see, but try to keep some materials off on the side if you can for Sentry, since he will provide you a lot of value not only in PvP, but does seem to do quite decently in PvE as well. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to review Thor and Hulk before the discounts end, so if you're wondering about those characters, Thor gets a pretty sizable improvement in specifically World Boss Legend with a new uniform, but doesn't really change much elsewhere. So if you were thinking of using him for Alliance Battle, you're not really going to get much value there. Hulk does get a pretty decent improvement in things like Alliance Conquest in the ways that he can burst down specific characters, and does seem to have quite a good amount of value in things like Alliance Battle Extreme and Alliance Battle Legend, depending on the builds that you use. So that's something to consider. You can either use something like a Conquest, Regen, or Refinement on him for Alliance Battle Extreme and for Alliance Conquest and Timeline, but for Alliance Battle Legend, you need a CTP of Rage to make him excel there. Currently testing Ant-Man with a CTP of Conquest, but I think a CTP of Regen or a CTP of Destruction could also work for him. So if you're wondering about him, that's some potential options you can use, and he does seem to be quite good in Alliance Conquest. Anyways, that is pretty much the end of this one. This is a very long video, and I put a lot of work into this one, so if you did enjoy it, please consider liking, subscribing, sharing it with others. It could definitely help them out, and it will definitely help me out too. And as always, I appreciate people taking all this time to watch my videos. Thank you, but the video is now over.